I'm going to be as honest as I can about optimism, and I'll try to be gentle here. I understand many people who will watch this will get fairly uncomfortable. It's only natural. While some of this may seem like personal attacks, just take them as criticisms for life in general. This isn't about my own existence. This isn't about eugenics. It's pretty simple. It's just pessimism applied through the most objective lens possible. I used to be extremely optimistic, actually, and I used to be the antithesis of my current identity. So I've been on both sides of the fence, but I don't see myself ever being optimistic again. Still, optimism does have benefits. It's a tool after all. And you do need the right tools for the right job. But I'll explain why optimism fails in the long run and why I use it sparingly. So throughout this video, try to apply these optimism and pessimism ideas with a realistic scenario, set your bias aside, and tell me which description is more accurate. Of course, I have my own bias, and I'll try to set that aside as well. But my description of pessimism here, by the way, it's seeing life as an overall negative, and that our future will ultimately get worse. And because of the way life operates, we should just discontinue sentient existence as soon as possible. That would be the logical conclusion. So as defined, pessimism is an inclination to emphasize adverse aspects, conditions, and possibilities, or just to expect the worst possible outcome. It's not necessarily short-term defeatism, nor must it be moral nihilism. People seem to conflate a lot of negative values with one another. Obviously, there can be some overlap, but the pessimism I focus on is that life continuing to exist is the worst outcome. In fact, I'll explain exactly why I'm not an optimistic nihilist in another video. So, I believe optimistic thinking as a whole is myopic and short-sighted. For some reason, people strawman me as stating that optimism doesn't have some value while we're alive. It's just a survival mechanism. Pessimism isn't, or at least it's more so against our nature. So why would I willingly be a pessimist without putting some thought into it? It's more than conditioning. It's more than that. Optimism really says nothing useful about life itself. We only use it tactically in certain moments. But even here, some people don't need to hinge on certain attitudes to provide good results. I can be a pessimist and reduce suffering. I can strive to be the best I can with dignity, while simultaneously believing that life, as a whole, as best as we can measure, is a waste, a price too steep to pay and pointless. I have many reasons to believe our future is fucked, but I can still fight in the present. Not only does pessimism not hold disdain towards present pain and suffering, it works perfectly in tandem with fighting against miserable experiences. It's just that people can become mired in their misery. But it can also be utilized just as well, if not better, than optimistic tactics. The people who understand these plights can have greater empathy, while an optimist might give them a weak platitude like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or it'll get better, I promise. No, it doesn't, not eventually. You can get stronger, true. I acknowledge this, and I even live this way sometimes, but life in general always gets worse. You get older and weaker, and then you die. It's partially correct then that it does get better eventually, but only when you don't exist. So there's a reason why younger people tend to be more optimistic, and then less so as they get older. In general, life beats us down whether we deserve it or not, and the older people living decently haven't even done the dying part yet. All it takes is one really bad moment to ruin everything. Even so, I understand the use of optimism. If pessimism is the tactical nukes or artillery in warfare, optimism would be the infantry. They both have their uses. But in the long term, I'll take pessimism. I'd rather send out assassins in small skirmishes than large battalions marching right into death, row by row. Optimism may help to win some battles, but it's also a distraction to keep you in the war. We can use doses of optimism to advance in science, to keep us alive another day, to reduce suffering as much as possible. Yeah, I get it. I do. Sometimes we need to hug each other, sing Kumbaya, and eat oatmeal cookies together to get through another day. I understand. But we need to be careful about spilling our delusions onto the perspective of life as a whole. Appeasing our ego does nothing to fix the game. Unless optimists believe that life is a bad game, I'll only use some of their tactics to win the war. They're going to have to step aside of their busy dancing and playing with their genitals on the battlefield. But I rarely see optimists scrutinizing life as a whole, at least from my experience. They'd rather convince other people to keep fighting battles and ignore the long-term war. And this is what I consider important. Optimists treat the distractions of life as the meaning of life, when there is no inherent meaning. A broader view will require you to honestly ask that if we have to create our own meaning while we're here, if the price is worth it, and why one should subject someone else to inherent meaninglessness. I don't mind people creating their own meaning. It's just about creating meaning by proxy for someone else, someone who never required any meaning. You can be deprived of meaning once you exist, but never if you don't exist. I believe meaning has value here because I often see people suffer when they realize this is all pointless, especially coming from religious backgrounds. So, a simple test to see whether or not you're currently pessimistic or optimistic is, for example, to imagine you can roll some dice and the result will put you in a new life. So, let's say you end up somewhere average more or less, but do you really want to be an average person, another wage slave? Do you want to become, for example, a woman in Asia that works 60 hours a week just to scrape by paycheck to paycheck, and you constantly worry about being taken advantage of? You're so optimistic that you're building towards something great, even at the expense of your own life, that even though there's no God and you would slave away pointlessly every day for no reason whatsoever, this is worth it? This is the beauty that you see in life? You get to hear your favorite songs and eat some nice food, in moments of respite. But then what? Is that worth something? Even worse, even if it's a 1 in 20 chance, for example, that your life will be absolutely awful. For example, you're kidnapped and made to be a sex slave. And yes, sex trafficking is the worst it's ever been in human history. Another reason not to be an optimist. And that's your life until you get killed at a young age. Are those the odds you're okay gambling with for yourself or for someone else? How good does an average life have to be before you're willing to roll the dice? I personally wouldn't roll the dice to be a steaming pile of donkey shit to trade my life for an asshole like Elon Musk. That's the guy who's winning in life, by the way, by incredible margins. So you want to roll the dice to be some shallow narcissist who lies, cheats, and abuses power? No, I wouldn't want to be anyone ever again, not by choice, and certainly not by luck. So even if you plan to parent and prepare a good life for your child, they'll still have their own interpretation of what their own good life means. You cannot guarantee them a good life from their perspective. They're not a mindless slave. They're an independent person. For example, a wholesome Christian family would staunchly disagree with me here. They'd have children and believe it was some divine purpose to do this. Okay, so what's their insurance plan when the child becomes an atheist? What now? So this is just one example. But what you can do here is guarantee them a prevention of every single bad thing that could ever happen in any one life. If you really believe you're denying someone's existence to experience the joys of life, why not just adopt a kid who's already here? Provide them with the joys instead, if that's your reason. So you want your own kid? So it's just about personal ego? Please explain how you might reason with someone who wants to abuse others out of personal ego. How would you personally expect to stop someone from placating their desires for no good purpose here? And using optimistic tactics, it's just distracting yourself to survive. It's pessimism towards life and our future in general that are the aim. Wishful thinking, even if those thoughts do come to fruition, says nothing about the goodness of life as a whole. For example, the utility in hoping for a bonus at work, and then you get one. Now, it may possibly have given you motivation to work for it. Again, I don't deny some utility. I never did. Keeping your spirits up to fight another day is a real thing. However, many actions, if not most, are out of our control. And regardless of our optimistic outlook, these actions will cause a great deal of pain and suffering. And I already know the argument to this. I've heard it a million times. You can choose to wallow in that suffering or to move on. Yes, I know. I've heard it all before. I even live in what's called Happy Valley. It's an optimist's haven. But the argument I make is the events themselves are objectively real. And the total objective negative events in our life have a price, a heavy burden on others, as well with unseen rippling effects. And it's all for no purpose or design. This is the core outlook of my pessimism. And the downside of optimistic failure can be a heavy loss. If you haven't steeled yourself for the worst, you can end up crashing harder and just destroy more in your delusions. Use optimism with futility as you must, but kept to a minimum, of course. It's like a poison you can inject into yourself to build an immunity. Use only a little here. You don't really want to spread delusions to other people. You don't want to live so optimistically that you get caught up in the party of life and you continue the bloody dance. At the end of the day, whether you see things negatively or positively, what we're doing here while we're alive is just trying to escape deathly traps. Sort of like the Saw franchise, pushing others into certain traps and calling it a victory when we get to exit. We call it good when we turn a blind eye to the tortured bodies around us because that wasn't us. Why should that matter, though? The main difference between the optimist and the pessimist here is that the optimist might perform better, lucky or not. He might even try to help someone else, where the pessimist might have endured more suffering. He may fear the traps that he could evade, but he will recognize the game is bad. He will criticize the game being bad, that it shouldn't be played at all, and that we should work to destroying this game. So it is easier to recognize a broken game when you're the one that's damaged. These people have to complain because the optimists won't. If the most damaged people won't criticize the shitty game, why should the ones with a few scrapes do that? The optimist may understand this, though it's much more unlikely. His attitude is biased towards better outcomes. He'll consider himself a victor simply by surviving. And in his moment of triumph, he will likely ignore the others, and he will likely ignore that the game itself is problematic, that it should not be played. He is drunk on false victory. So surely, if it was not so bad or even beautiful for him, it was beautiful for others, correct? The arrogance that he can call it a good game on behalf of others is really astounding. And you'll mock the pessimist who calls it a pile of shit on behalf of others? You'll do that? So they get the benefit here. The people who take the brunt of the worst. They can judge it more fairly because they understand the game better. Regardless of their attitude, they simply have more experience getting caught in the traps. And I don't want anyone with delusions telling me that this is good enough. It's objectively a bad game, and the corpses are the evidence. And what is a good outcome, by the way? The great outcome of life. So instead of living in a third world country, you live in a second or a first. Instead of working 60 hours a week, you'll slave away at 40. All for what? What is the outcome? That you lived life with less suffering than someone else, and you can rub it in their face? It's the reason we love to mock and humiliate people. It's a distraction that our own lives are meaningless and painful. So I ask optimists, when is it enough? When is it enough? As I've said before, we're already living in some utopia of a yesterday. Suppose people hundreds of years ago predicted worldwide instant communication, or better healthcare, painkillers, everything we use today. Would they say today as we do? I think we can all agree that progress can be made, but what I believe optimists fail to see is every step forward just takes 2 steps down. We can stave off diseases, we can live longer, but now we suffer more. We just deteriorate slower. Since the industrial age, human population has skyrocketed. Now more people have higher competition. It's just more meat for the meat grinder. We have 8 billion people, but is that a net positive? That's billions more people that have to deal with depression, anxiety, and everyday menial labor and constant pains. So continued existence is almost entirely just maintenance. How many more cookies do you need? How many more Super Bowls? So very rarely does anything fall outside of the been there, done that box once you're an adult. Life isn't a video game. You don't just level up and become stronger as you continue to play. As you become smarter, wiser, and more experienced, you still lose your edge. You deteriorate. So I want to ask optimists, when is it enough? What's the end goal? I imagine the response will be something like, well, the goal is always moving forward, it's the journey, to keep going where we've never gone before, to learn more. If you want to know your future, you should study the past. And what do we have? hundreds of millions of years of evolution, organisms eating each other to survive, just to continue surviving, survive, kill, reproduce, rearrange, reintegrate, build different. But we're always made of the same thing. Optimists will also claim that I'm too reductionist, that I'm oversimplifying life. Am I being too reductionist here? No, you're just being unnecessarily overcomplicating. It's like saying war isn't so bad because, there's cool tanks involved, explosions are fun to look at, there's just so much you're missing by ignoring the details of war. You miss all the cool strategy, the striving and the growth through the bloodshed, and all the fun moments we have together while sitting in the trench and trading stories. It's all really beautiful when you think about it, right? That's what you sound like. You say all of this while ignoring the most important aspect of war, innocent suffering. So yes, I'm going to ignore your overcomplicated details. The suffering dwarfs the various details encompassed within it. Shit with sprinkles still tastes like shit. I've already addressed this in the previous video, but if you're going to be so brazen to state that life is more than just pain and pleasure, I'm just going to say you're dressing up unimportant details with bullshit, and at the same time you're trivializing pain. Furthermore, you're in a privileged position to say this now, but life generally declines. So it's safe to say if you're doing well now, give it some time and we'll reevaluate your opinion. Again, there's a reason why younger people tend to be more optimistic. They lack experience. And if you believe in a God, you're going to have some really good points to convince me of such a thing. You won't need optimism, though. You'll just need evidence. Even if you believe in a God, why should you be optimistic about life? Why would you continue this process if you force someone into a possibility, no matter how remote, of going to hell and suffering forever? Infinite punishment for finite sins. Why would you do that? Why would you need optimism at all if you can just ask your God to save you? Why need any coping mechanism at all if you have a divine authority figure to back you up? So just to reiterate, optimism has utility when we apply it to our everyday lives, but it begins to fail when we apply it to life itself. Honestly, I'll help people build to some better future if it proves there's some positive value to life. But don't expect me to keep my mouth shut. Really don't. I just want to know what my effort was worth when we get there, and you're still not satisfied. You want another car, slightly faster. You want more land with more people to encroach upon. The optimists will have to answer the pessimists of the price we all pay for some future fantasy when we reach another benchmark of another utopia. You're going to have to justify why you dragged us along when it's never good enough, when health and technology has improved, but for some reason people have become more isolated, more depressed, and endure more long-term suffering. That people continue to elect corrupt fraudsters to rule them, that people enslave each other, people abuse one another, and that for every ounce of freedom gained is a ton of people crushed under the heels of their oppressors. For every disease conquered, 2 more emerge. For every successful businessman, we create 100 wage slaves. For every desire satisfied, we require 10 more, and 10 times better. You're going to need to justify this. And the pessimists won't be satisfied to tell the optimists, I told you so. They'll need recompense, and you won't have it. And that's how I see life from today's standpoint relative to yesterday's. So use optimism wisely, but not frivolously. I don't see a better tomorrow. If today isn't good enough, no day ever will be. So let's stop being busy little worker ants and inspect the nest we're building. Admire your work and learn to let go. That's it. So that's enough for now. And I appreciate you listening. Just something else to think about. But I genuinely do hope you have a good day. But it's not enough to hope. So take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.